If you can please rise for a moment of reflection and the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Pledge of Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Here.
Mrs. Hoover?
Here.
Ms. Royce?
Here.
Mrs. Bowling?
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Here.
Mr. Gerton?
Here.
Mr. Braden?
Here. And we have all members present this evening. Moving on to amendment of the agenda, we have several. We will remove the Infrastructure, Streets, Park, Recreation, and Public Places Committee report. We will add a communication regarding the PUD at Sherman Avenue. We will also add a resolution regarding a then and now certificate pertaining to the Elm Avenue project. And also, someone can make this motion at that time, but Mayor Schneider said he will be arriving a little late this evening. So if he does arrive after the administration reports, if someone can make a motion to allow him to speak at that time. All right. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mr. Braden to amend the agenda as stated. Is there a second? Mr. Gerton.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gerton. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. So we will move right into the second, oh, no, we won't. We have requests to address council. And the first request to address council is Charlene Myers.
So I'm going to have to pull up my notes, sorry. I'm Charlene Myers, and as you all know, I've been doing meals on a monthly basis, and I thought it would be about time for me to give you some numbers because we are seeing a significant uptick in some folks that are coming to visit us. When we started out, we saw 10 people, and that was, we were kind of happy that we saw those 10 people, but now we're up to about 50 to 60 people per meal, and we've seen 238 people since January. Obviously, they're not different people, they're the same people counted over and over again, but that just shows you that there is a need, and the people we're seeing are unfortunately appear to be, obviously we don't ask them these questions, but appear to be living significantly below the poverty line, some of them appear to be homeless, some of them appear to be in great need. So we're also going to open up our food pantry on the nights of meals because it does seem, again, like it's a needed thing. Some of the food pantries were closed on July 4th because it happened to be a Thursday, and I was getting texts like, could you get me a bag, so, because they are able to, I don't give them my personal phone number, but everybody has my Google Voice number, and so I was getting texts to drop off a bag here and drop off a bag there, so there definitely is a need. 85% of the people that we're seeing are coming from the 45212 zip code. Everybody else is like all over the place, so it's not really worth, kind of talking about the rest. We are seeing about 82 people visit our monthly food. I was going to say that can't be me.
That's not.
82 people that visit our monthly food pantry, and we are looking to increase that. We were able to secure a major donation. I don't know if you're aware of this, but sadly SNC closed. It's a church that was doing a food pantry, but they were so great. They gave other food pantries an opportunity to basically go shopping and load up their car to take to the food pantry. So that was very generous in terms of, just kind of making those connections in this world. We're very connected with Ashland Food Pantry, and they allow us to hand out signs and, flyers and all that good stuff. And many of their clients come to our meals, which is really helpful, our guests. Finally, we're doing a backpack refresh at Norwood View School on September 28th. We're going to invite parents and grill out, hopefully if the weather goes well, and kind of grill out and give that treat to parents. We have a group of young adults that are going to manage that for us. It's going to be a service learning project for them. And our next meal is this Thursday, so all are welcome if you are able to attend. But again, just thought I'd give you a progress update of what's happening with our meals. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, our next request to address council is Susan Daniels. I didn't do it.
Hello. Susan Daniels, 2063 Maple Avenue. I'm here to represent the Norwood Historical Society as president. So I just want to go over a few, we got quite a few events coming up, so I just wanted to share that publicly. And then a special event that we also have going on, collaboration. So just for August and September, we started doing Norwood Trivia, which is kind of fun at the Northwood Cidery. So I've been doing that the first Wednesdays of the month at 6:30. So I've kind of been handing out of my own pocket a prize. So whoever wins the trivia gets a prize. So it's a lot of fun. So August 7th is the next one. And the theme will be about schools. So old school. And then August 14th, we have a story time. So I'll be talking about Norwood's story and how we began. We'll have an exhibit, and that will be at the cafeteria, the community center, also at 6:30. Probably about an hour and a half, maybe. We'll have some cake and ice cream, and then we'll have items on exhibit, and then I'll talk about the stories of those items, and we'll just have fun. Oh, and then I'll also have like a slideshow. Then September 4th, trivia again, Northwood Cidery at 6:30. September 18th, we're going to have a Norwood Curiosities at Northwood Cidery at 6:30. Probably about an hour, but that'll be fun stories, kind of like the stories that make you go, you know? All about Norwood, of course. Nothing gruesome, nothing bad, just some funny stories. And then September 22nd, we have a history sampler, along with the big collaboration group that we have with other historical societies and museums. It's part of the whole collaboration with the museums and historic sites of Greater Cincinnati. One of the associations that we belong to for the Historical Society, and that will be held September 22nd at 12 p.m. to 4 at the Cincinnati Observatory. And it'll be a bunch of Hamilton County historical societies and museums. We'll have like tables and booths and stuff like that, and just kind of meet and greet and just get to learn a variety of other historical societies and museums. So it's a really good event. And then last but not least, kind of going back to August, a new special project, quick collaboration with our friends at the Harriet Beecher Stowe House Museum. We did a collaboration with them in the library. So we're going to have 4 events, which is connecting the our local history of Norwood and Cincinnati, of course, and it will be about the Green Book. So we'll have Facebook events, and then Eventbrite. Of course, I think the library is doing their own event page, but it's all connected into one big collaboration event. So August 10th, there will be a book discussion, and it will be about the book Driving the Green Book, which is written by Alvin Hall. So that will be at the library. That will be at 10:30, and that will be hosted by the library. August 18th, we will be doing a field trip. Kind of, you drive your own. Drive down to the Freedom Center. We'll just do like a meet and greet at 1 o'clock. And we're trying to see if we can get like a private tour maybe. But definitely a meet and greet and kind of look at the exhibits that the Freedom Center currently has. Actually, I think it starts later this week. But they're doing a traveling exhibit by the Smithsonian of the Green Book. So they'll have a bunch of exhibits and artifacts and stuff. August 24th, another book discussion is at the Northwood Cidery at 12, and that will be hosted by the Harriet Beecher Stowe House. And then August 25th, so the next day, we'll have at the Norwood Community Center in the cafeteria at 4 o'clock. We'll have a panel discussion. So we'll have facilitators and moderators. We'll have some snacks. We might have trying to gather some stuff for exhibits, but it's an open forum. It's going to be talking about the book that we're going to discuss. And we will be having, I think I might be missing a name, but we'll have Diamond Crowder from the State Historic Preservation Office, Catherine Gardette with the Walnut Hills Area Council, Becky Baker with Ignite Peace, Byron Stallworth with Cincinnati Planning Commission, myself, Susan Hoover, and I think I'm missing one more name because I didn't print out what I needed to read off. So anyway, so we'll have, again, it's an open forum panel discussion talking about the Green Book and racism. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Moving on to second readings of ordinances and resolutions. We have resolution of council designating a statement of mission, vision, values, and goals for the city of Norwood. Mrs. Franzen.
I'll make a motion to have the second reading.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to have the second reading. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the second reading of the resolution.
Resolution of council designating statement of mission, vision, values, and goals for the city of Norwood, Ohio.
Thank you. Moving on to introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. The first is an ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2024 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Okay, make a motion to pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Is there a second? Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. Ordinance authorizing the conditional offer of employment to Ralph Wolf for the position of building commissioner and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mr. Gerton.
I'll second that motion.
Seconded by Mr. Gerton. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance authorizing the conditional offer of employment to Ralph Wolf for the position of building commissioner and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the conditional offer of employment to Ralph Wolf for the position of building commissioner and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the conditional offer of employment to Ralph Wolf for the position of building commissioner and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion to pass the ordinance? Ms. Royce,
I'll motion we pass the ordinance.
is there a second? Mrs. Hoover,
I'll second.
seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I'd love to invite Mr. Powers to talk a little bit about this role and individual.
Thank you so
Mr.
much.
Powers.
So this is an offer for Mr. Wolf to become the building commissioner, which would serve as the chief building official for the city. So we'd have that brought in-house. Presently, right now, it's done on a contract basis. And Mr. Wolf is here this evening. Mr. Wolf is an architect, so he is eligible to get all the certifications necessary to carry the building department forward. Offer him an opportunity to.
Thank you for putting me on the spot. I just want to thank you all for voting me in and being part of the Norwood family.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions?
Any questions? Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion on the floor by Ms. Royce, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to pass the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is a resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the Community Development Fund 1001-0880-57200 and the Mayor's Fund 1001-0300-57200 to pay for services already rendered by Bradley Payne LLC for municipal advisory work and declaring an emergency. What's your pleasure? Mrs. Franzen.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mr. Braden.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the resolution.
Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the general fund streets section capital fund to pay for engineering services in support of the Elm Avenue flooding.
Wrong one.
I'm so sorry. That is the wrong one. Sorry, this one, right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the Community Development Fund 1001-0880-57200 and the Mayor's Fund 1001-0300-57200 to pay for the services already rendered by Bradley Payne LLC for municipal advisory work and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the Community Development Fund 1001-0880-57200 and the Mayor's Fund 1001-0300-57200 to pay for services already rendered by Bradley Payne LLC for municipal advisory work and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the Community Development Fund 1001-0880-57200 and the Mayor's Fund 1001-0300-57200 to pay for services already rendered by Bradley Payne LLC for municipal advisory work and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Hoover.
I move we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to pass the resolution. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next resolution. Resolution in support of the Ohio Drone for First Responders pilot program and approving a letter from the Safety Service Director in support and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mrs. Hoover.
I would love it if we could hear a little bit more about this, if that's something Mr. Powers would be able to do through the
Mr. Powers.
Well, I can give only kind of brief details, but the gist of it is that at the University of Cincinnati, they are starting a pilot drone program for first responders, and we would like to be a part of that program. So essentially what would happen is there would be a spotter for the drone that's sort of like a camera that would be mounted somewhere in the city, so that it can keep an eye on the drone, which is kind of a weird thing to think about. Something has to watch the drone. And then the drone itself would be housed at the fire department, and so when a call for service comes out, the drone just flies right out to it and then gives an aerial view for the first responders so that they don't show up on the scene surprised about what they're going to see. They know what it is before they get there. And so we would be one of the first departments that would have that based on this pilot program.
Mrs. Franzen.
So essentially, this would be a drone that is flying in response to things not flying about.
Yeah, it wouldn't
Like
just
a-
be meandering around town looking for emergencies. It would, when a call came in, it would dispatch based on the details of that call.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Braden.
Thank you, President. Dispatched from our fire department, I'm assuming?
That's right.
The only thing I'm concerned about is some of our residents thinking that spying on them. I don't know, we've had that issue. I don't know if you guys remember that or not.
Mrs. Franzen.
That's why I figured I'd ask, because I feel like if it's zipping directly to somewhere, it is different
Never
than it
forget that.
flying, what would see, patrolling possibly what seems at random or perhaps targeted. So that is good to know that it would be just direct to the emergency.
Ms. Royce.
Just because the language is kind of vague, it would only be the fire department, not the police department?
That's right.
Only, okay.
Yeah, the fire department would basically be the part of our organization that's testing the drone to see how it works. Yeah, that's correct.
Mrs. Bowling.
You may not even know this, but would the footage be recorded?
Do not know that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's recording or if it's just making a broadcast.
Any other questions or discussion? All right. Motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the resolution.
Resolution in support of the Ohio Drone for First Responders pilot program and approving a letter from the Safety Service Director in support and declaring an emergency. Resolution in support of the Ohio Drone for First Responders pilot program and approving a letter from the Safety Service Director in support and declaring an emergency. Resolution in support of the Ohio Drone for First Responders pilot program and approving a letter from the Safety Service Director in support and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll make a motion to pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the resolution. Is there a second? Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item, resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the Water Fund 5050-0853-57300 to pay for a meter from Neptune Equipment Company, Nico Water, and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Move we suspend the rules and have all three readings?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Ms. Royce.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Gerton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden,
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the resolution.
Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from Water Fund 5050-0853-57300 to pay for a meter from Neptune Equipment Company, NECA Water, and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from Water Fund 5050-0853-57300 to pay for a meter from Neptune Equipment Company, NECA Water, and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from Water Fund 5050-0853-57300 to pay for a meter from Neptune Equipment Company, Neckar Water, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the resolution. Is there a second? Mr. Gerton.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gerton. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is a resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the General Fund Street Section Capital Fund number 1001-0852-57600 to pay for engineering services in support of the Elm Avenue flooding mitigation project and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the resolution.
Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the General Fund Streets Section Capital Fund number 1001-0852-57600 to pay for engineering services in support of the Elm Avenue flooding mitigation project and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the General Fund Streets Section Capital Fund 1001-0852-57600 to pay for engineering services in support of the Elm Avenue flooding mitigation project and declaring an emergency. Resolution authorizing the city auditor to approve a then and now certificate from the General Fund, Streets Section, Capital Fund 1001-0852-57600 to pay for engineering services in support of the Elm Avenue flooding mitigation project and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Hoover.
I move we suspend the rules. No, I'm
So
sorry.
we want to-
I'm awake. I move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Hoover to pass the resolution. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next on the agenda, we have administration reports. Yes, we do. I will, look. Mayor Schneider.
I'm sorry. I thought you needed a motion for that. Sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
Yes, we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. July is a huge month for, of course, the city of Norwood. So the Norwood hometown fireworks just went off, and we had some rains come through, but it cleared up and we were able to pull them off. There's a couple of key players. You know, when we talk about the Norwood hometown fireworks, we're not talking about the city of Norwood taxpayers paying for those fireworks. It's all donations. It's all volunteers that work on the committee. My wife, Debbie, ran the committee this year, but there's multiple people on the committee, and we've been doing that for 20 years now. And then there's the master of the fireworks ceremony. Encore Technologies right here in town was our major provider this year major sponsor, and, they do IT solutions for all over the world. And there's quite a few people that live in the city of Norwood that work for Encore Technologies and have grown up here. So it's very nice to have them involved in it. PLK, of course, was involved in it. Shepherd Chemical, Tom Shepherd and the Shepherd family, always huge community advocates and pushing to help us forward. So that's 3. Next year, we're hoping to make it even bigger and better. But, we got to that same period with our hometown fireworks with the committee where we were challenged to make sure we had all the money in place to pay all the bills. Now, we were capable of doing that. It's a 501(c)(3) and it came through. But it gets tougher every year to make sure that, we're able to put these on at the scale that we want to put them on. And then we weren't sure if the stadium was going to be completed on time in the times, but it all worked out very well. Skyline Chili even had a fundraiser for the fireworks, and I think it brought in $300 or $400, a pretty good fundraiser from Skyline. Cappy's is doing a fundraiser this Saturday for the fireworks, Saturday, July 13th from 4 to 10. And they are going to, and I know they've did some fundraisers for even like the band boosters and some other city of Norwood organizations. So we've got some really great corporate, partners that are willing to give for this stuff. So that's the July 4th stuff. Then we've got the fundraiser coming up on the 13th, Saturday the 13th. And then we have, let's see on my list, Norwood Day at Victory Park. Norwood Day at Victory Park is Saturday, July 20th. So that's right around the corner. And they've got a ton of raffle baskets and all the good stuff that they used to have at Old Coney and Sunlight Pool. They don't have the pool, but they've got all the other good stuff that comes with Norwood Day. I know they're having a cornhole tournament. I think that there's a couple of people from Public Works, like Tony Pennington, that thinks he's like the cornhole king. So we'll see if he's there. And then Darren Hackworth, our project manager, he thinks he's the cornhole king. So we'll see. It's going to be some interesting. I don't know if the question is, will they have a baby contest? Because they always have a baby contest. At least they have in years past. So I think they got to have the baby contest there, but we'll see. I don't know. They're still in the planning stages because I talked to a couple of them here very recently and they were still planning some things out for Norwood Day at Victory Park. That's on July 20th. Then July 23rd, so again, Norwood Day at Victory Park, put on by the Norwood Business and Professional Women's Organization, another civic group that's involved in it and taking care of this, a bunch of good volunteers. Then we've got the Norwood Day Parade coming up, July 23rd. That's a Tuesday evening for the big Norwood Day Parade. Who's that being put on? Well, not actually the city, but the city's Chamber of Commerce. So the Chamber of Commerce is putting that on. Again, another civic organization that pushes this community so much further forward and keeps it to what we want it to be, which is, that small hometown that we all love. July 26th, 27th, and 28th is the Holy Trinity Festival. That's the only big festival going on in the city, I think, this year. I know there's a lot of other events going on, but this is really a big one where they have bands and there's a lot going on that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. So there's all sorts. July, I've always said July is it's been a busy month for me and my family for years and years, and it's a busy month. There's so many fun things to do in the city. The pool, another thing, the Waterworks JB Worth pool, I went past there on July 4th and the staff was there and they were decorating it all up and it really looked so patriotic because Cincinnati Pool Management that's managing the pool this year, they have a competition between all the pools that they manage to try to get that going and really spark some enthusiasm towards the pool. And I think they did a really good job. It looked great when I was there. NOAA has been working hard. You guys passed some stuff on the Elm Avenue project. NOAA continues to work hard and the staff continues to work hard on that stuff. Smith and Carthage Avenue, we've all been, have our traffic flow disrupted there. The Bridget Kelly Norwood lateral project on 562 continues to move forward. So there's a lot of good stuff happening. They say this is construction season, like right through the summer, you're going to have the orange barrels and there's a lot of construction going on. We're getting our fair share of it. So a lot of really good stuff happening right now in the city of Norwood. And if you just stay at home and miss it, you're missing. July's the month to get out and see your friends, people that live in your neighborhood that maybe you say, oh, I'd see that guy somewhere, and maybe I'll say hi. And that's a good time to do it. So that's really all I have, Mr. President.
All right. Any questions for Mayor Snyder?
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So you'll have next week by the council meeting the financial reports for June, but just know that the city is still doing really well. The office is still working hard on getting as much earnings taxes as we can. We just sent a letter yesterday to a business that we found out that new business, but they weren't withholding for their employees yet. So we noticed it and we're getting it addressed. So really exciting there. I will just want to say the fireworks, off topic, but fireworks were fantastic. And every year, I'm always blown away by how good they are, how the duration and the quality. And this year, they started it almost like a finale. I mean, this year it was just like boom, right in your face as soon as it starts. It was great. So thanks to you, Mr. Mayor, and everybody else that works on that. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Bonzo? All right. Mr. Moore? Questions for Mr. Moore? All right. Moving on to unfinished business. Mrs. Hoover?
I'll be brief. I'm curious if you do have the graphic I sent you. Thank you so much, sir. Maybe. Just want to let folks know that there were some residents that came last council that were really having some frustrations with some neighbors. Just want to remind everyone, See, Click, Fix. So many people don't utilize it, and this is the best way for folks to communicate the non-emergency needs that they see to city officials. So if you can please use that. I played around with Canva last night. That was fun. But wanted to just let everyone in council as well as the community know that the city has been very active responding to those concerns. I've met with the neighbors as well as Mr. Powers has had many conversations, the building department, the Board of Health, the police, the fire. Everyone is aware of what's going on and some strategy is moving forward. It was put into committee. I think that it can be resolved without being in committee, but I think we should still have schedule a meeting for the housing committee to see if there's anything that we should adjust to perhaps the nuisance property ordinance. So wondering if folks would be available Tuesday, August the 13th. Housing, health, and public safety. Folks.
I'm available.
And do 6:30? Does that give us an hour? Hour enough? Okay. So 6:30. Also on that, I got a issue from the law department, Mr. Moore, that we'll also put into that regarding garbage cans. That'll be fun to talk about. And that is all my unfinished business. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Mrs. Boland?
Oh my goodness, I almost let it slide by, sorry. We had talked previously about doing a small business committee meeting on the 22nd. Mrs. Hoover is unavailable that day, which is just fine. We said when we scheduled it that we would reschedule if necessary. So I would like to reschedule that because I feel you are important to be there. Will you remind me of your
I'm back on the 26th. So the week of the 29th of July.
Beautiful. How do we feel about the 29th? Is that doable or is that too soon to your?
Monday, the 29th.
In the evening, do we think?
I can do it.
Perfect. Okay, let's go for, what time did we originally decide? 5:30. What do we think about 6?
Works for me.
Small business.
Too much.
You will not be there. Do you want to send me a bullet points? Okay, fabulous. Okay, let's go for 6 o'clock on the 29th. I will send a communication to everyone whose emails we collected at the last. They know. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Mrs. Franzen?
I just wanted to let residents of Norwood know this is happening in Cincinnati and South Fairmont, but it is open to anyone in Hamilton County. Keep Cincinnati Beautiful has an initiative called Don't Dump the Natty. I know a lot of people are doing renovations and yard work and all sorts of stuff, accumulating a lot of bulk garbage that's kind of hard to get rid of with your daily or with your weekly trash. So there is a free trash dump site. They have dump trucks. You come up in your truck or car, just throw them in the dump truck for free from 9 to 1 on the last Friday of each month. So the 26th of July, August 30th, September 27th. The last one is the 1st of November because of Halloween, I think. But yeah, you can go there. It's 2121 State Avenue, 45214. You can look up Keep Cincinnati Beautiful. You can bring pretty much anything, even tires, although you're limited to 10. Only things you can't bring are hazardous waste items like paint or wet paint, oils, refrigerator, air conditioner, batteries, but everything else like furniture, construction debris, cabinetry, you can get rid of it. You might have to wait in line a little bit, but they'll take it to you for free. So you can save a little money, a little time. It can be from your personal projects or from construction debris that you do for your job. So wanted to let everyone know. It was very nice when I went there, pretty quick.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other new business? Mrs. Hoover.
I'm wondering if you could flip to the next one. Oh, no, that's not mine.
That's fine.
Okay.
This one.
Like, oh, no, I'm not prepared. To follow up with what Susan Daniels with the Norwood Historical Society said, Driving the Green Book was a book that was written just a few years ago, not to be confused with the movie The Green Book. This is a sociological look at the Green Book, which was a motorist guide for Black Americans during the Jim Crow years, sort of 1936 to 67. And it was essentially a AAA guide kind of book that indicated to motorists where were safe locations for them to stop for gas, for housing, that sort of thing. What's really exciting is that the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, which is just right a neighbor of ours, they are recreating a part of their building to be the hotel that was used, that was part of the Green Book. So that's a very, very exciting renovation that they're, well, renovation, it's a degeneration, I'm not sure. And the Smithsonian, as Ms. Daniels mentioned, is doing a traveling exhibit of this, and it will be at the Freedom Center from mid-July through October. And that will have a ton of first resources. I have had the opportunity to read the book. One of the reasons it's particularly important, I believe, for us is because it does mention Norwood specifically a few times, and not all that great. And this, I think, is a really phenomenal opportunity for us to take a look at some of our history and how Norwood has been viewed by others, and to decide how we want to acknowledge it and how we want to move forward. So this is it's something that I'm very excited about and feel very passionately about. If you are a history buff, if you are a Norwood buff, I encourage folks to read it. I would invite everyone on council to read this. There are copies. Catherine from the Norwood Library has some copies set aside. And I feel like as Norwoodians, we should be very familiar with all of our history and how we want to make sense of it. So just an invitation to all to read the book and share your thoughts and feelings about it. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowling.
You can go back one. Fabulous. So Hamilton County Public Health is partnering with the Norwood Board of Health and the Norwood Fire Department to host an International Overdose Awareness Day event. This will be essentially behind the fire department on August 14th, which is a Wednesday, from 1 to 3, and there will be all sorts of giveaways, hot dogs, refreshments, harm reduction information. They are giving away 5 booster seats, which are first come, first serve, and then there is a raffle for a convertible car seat as well. They're a great organization, and one of their members lives in Ward 1, which is fabulous. So go check that out and get some free resources.
Thank you. Any other new business? Ms. Royce?
I would just like to schedule a law and ordinance committee meeting. I guess I could have gone and unfinished as well. Do Tuesdays work better for people? Or we could do Mondays. I know we're scheduled for Monday this week. It didn't happen, but we could do August 5th or August 19th or the 8th. I'm pretty open in August.
I could do the 5th. I will be out of town the 19th.
Okay.
I can.
Okay. We'll plan for the 5th. Thank you.
What time?
Do you want to do 6?
6 is great.
Does that work for you? Okay.
All right, so to confirm, law and ordinance meeting, August 5th at 6 PM here in council chambers?
Yes, please.
All right. Any other new business? Just a reminder that this is our only scheduled meeting in the month of July. So city council does acknowledge one holiday, if you want to call that, one day off. And that is the fourth Tuesday in the month of July, which is also the Norwood Day Parade. So if there are any emergency items that require attention or passage prior to our August meeting, there is the likelihood we will call an emergency meeting. But as of right now, the next regularly scheduled council meeting is Tuesday, August the 13th. Anything else under new business? All right, moving on to communications. We have a letter from the Norwood Planning Commission regarding the preliminary PUD plan for 1631 Sherman Avenue.
On July 3rd, 2024, the Norwood Planning Commission held a public hearing regarding a preliminary plan per 1155.13 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances for a major planned unit development, PUD. The PUD application is to build a 108-unit apartment development for the property known as 1631 Sherman Avenue, Norwood, Ohio, 45212, Hamilton County, Book 651, page 0049, parcel 0073-00. This property is located within a neighborhood business zoning district with a planned unit development overlay, NBD/PUD. After listening to testimony, the Norwood Planning Commission voted unanimously to endorse and forward the above-mentioned preliminary PUD submission to Norwood City Council for a public hearing and further consideration. Planning Commission would further ask this memo be placed on the July 9th meeting of Norwood City Council in order for Council to set a public hearing no earlier than August 13th, 2024. Based on sections 1117.10 and 1117.11 of the Norwood Codified Ordinance, upon receipt of the recommendations of the Planning Commission, the Norwood City Council shall schedule a public hearing to be set no earlier than 30 days from the receipt of this memorandum.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion to receive and file.
And to set a public hearing for August the 13th.
And to set a public hearing for August the 13th.
Is there a second? Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, President. I'm just curious, I just looked at it, we're talking about the old Fun Factory.
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Winterbauer, seconded by Mrs. Bowling, is to receive and file the communication and set the public hearing for August 13th. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Riss?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Is there a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Bowling.
I move we adjourn.
Mr. Girton.
Second the motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mr. Garten to adjourn. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.
Thank you.